I will call the meeting to order. Welcome to, what are we calling this? The Capital Planning Subcommittee.
Yes.
I'm Sarah Williams, your friendly chair. And we're going to go around and introduce ourselves. So, first.
Matt Aaronworth, Assistant Superintendent.
Carrie Gaudette, School Committee Representative from Blackstone.
Greg Smalley, Project Manager, DRA Architects.
Jim Barrett, DRA Architects.
Barry Balso, Selectman Blackstone.
Erin Vanaco, School Committee Millville.
Tara Larkin, School Committee Millville.
Matthew Plant, Blackstone resident.
All right. If I could get a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. So all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Abstain.
Opposed? Nobody, and one abstain. Okay. Well, that was easy. Next on the agenda, we're going to review the study and go over any questions that people have come up with after reviewing it. Matt, take it away.
Certainly. So I think the best place to begin is with the questions. And I believe I had sent those out. I'm just pulling them up myself, though. I also linked them into the invite. So, there were 3 questions that we sent out, technical specific questions that people might have regarding the report. Were there any questions or disagreements with any of the statements or recommendations in the report? And then to kick things off, just in general, question 3 was, what are your thoughts? General questions, things that come to mind. So I think we can start. I know at least one member, a couple, may have specific technical questions. Actually, yours may not be technical.
Oh, they are.
Oh, excellent. So why don't we start with technical specific questions about the report? Did anyone else? I know Mr. Plant did have technical questions that he had jotted down. So why don't I turn the floor over to you, and you could ask those questions, and hopefully our experts will be able to assist us. If you have a page number, so that we can reference where your questions.
Most of the questions I have are brought up multiple times throughout the report. There were a couple that are pretty specific to buildings, but a few of them are just in generalized questions. You mentioned multiple times in the report the HAA 5, in drinking water in Millville, BMR, and I believe also at the complex, if I'm remembering correctly. So aside from Millville, all the Blackstone schools are on town water. Mm-hmm. So is this, if that comes from the cleaning and treating process of water, is the requirement in a school different than the requirement of a town water supply? Because the town water supply, according to the reports they publish, are extremely low.
Right. No, it does. There is no difference that we're aware of between the town public water supply and and within the schools. If that is cited, it would be because there was a warning label on the fixture or on the system. We did not do water testing. We took that verbatim. If the sign was still posted, we took that as a legitimate, still in effect warning.
Okay.
So to your point that we were just discussing briefly prior to the meeting, there are fixtures in the high school and the middle school and all that do still have signs that say hand washing only.
And on the lead and copper, I understand that, but the HAA 5s are that's from cleaning water.
Okay.
Yeah. However you say the word. I didn't want to butcher it too bad, so it was easier to
the
remember.
haloacetic acid.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, especially in that's noted in Millville a whole bunch of times, and that's a well system. So I don't know if that's just improper signage somewhere, if there's something there that's.
So there are no haloacetic acid issues that I'm aware of with respect to the Blackstone buildings. The haloacetic acid issues from Millville were part of the well treatment. It's part of as the,
On page 2-6, they're called out in the complex.
you'll have to,
No, they are there. You and I talked about this earlier, Matt. I
Oh.
talked about it with CES, the mechanical engineers, plumbing engineers who put that comment in. I talked with Matt, as far as Matt and I are being on the same page of it not being an issue
I
at the complex. CES says that they have in their records an image of a sign in the complex. So,
CES out of Cranston?
no.
Oh.
So our best bet there would be to go back through that building. I'll ask them, can you show me the picture, put me where that sign is, and we'll go find it.
Okay. Yeah, because it was called out in a couple of schools, and when I pulled, I mean, obviously Millville being well, I can't pull water testing from that, but when I pull out Blackstone water testing, it's less than 1 part per million, and the level's allowed to be 60. So,
and I apologize, when I am saying that there are no issues, so to speak, I know that we've spoken to the the Water Commission, the DEP, and the water is consumable
Yeah.
in Blackstone.
yeah, Blackstone Town.
The
Water is not horrible.
the haloacetic acids in Millville, the levels have varied so much that they got in touch with us and said we can't really be confident that the drinking water is suitable. So we actually don't run the bubblers at Millville Elementary School, and we use bottled water there. At this point, though, I believe we'll say there has been some consistency and the levels have been under control. And I know that the town administrator and I have spoken about it, and he feels confident that it could be utilized. But because the testing lags for some time, we just as a district have at this point still decided not to turn the bubblers on for public consumption right now.
And then my last technical question, because everything else is more group-based. You call it in the report a whole bunch of times propane versus oil.
Mhm.
Was there any actual studying done behind that fuel efficiency, or is that just a anecdotal because I can get 96% out of a boiler, it's going to be more energy efficient?
It's based on historical data, not from your schools, but from past projects where we've had the opportunity to compare those two.
Compare them on comparable systems or compare them only after an upgrade?
Basically on comparable systems, the data that we've had is pretty deep between what DRA has done and what CES and our other mechanical engineers have done. So it's a good starting point for discussing going further forward. You don't have, with natural gas, you then have the opportunity to do dual fuel, which may or may not help a district of this size, but that's the propane versus oil is always a discussion of which one's more beneficial to you, which one's easier to store, which one's more likely to be non-interruptible. There's a number of factors there. So if there's more to that comment, Matt, if there's a further that you would like CES to drill down, just get it over to Matt and we'll ask CES to elaborate on it.
Yeah, I saw it noted multiple times, and I've not seen that to be the case in 20-some years of doing HVAC work.
Okay.
I've not found propane to be a better alternative to oil.
Mhm.
And I didn't know if they looked at other sources, so that's why I was just curious. It was in that report multiple times as a technical point. So
Right.
I can say for the Millville building, just having replaced the boiler, we did have specific tests done on, or an analysis done on the existing system. And we did analyze the cost of biofuel as well. So there was biofuel, propane, and oil entertained. We did not entertain,
air source
Just-
heat pumps.
I'm sorry?
I said I'm assuming you did not entertain air source heat pumps.
I don't believe so. I don't think we entertained just upgrading the oil system either because it was an MSBA project, and the MSBA was looking to get away from oil, so they were supporting projects that moved to cleaner energy. So we did move in the direction of propane.
Thank you.
Were there other technical questions from anybody? Are there any from the perspective of DRA, are there any technical specifics that the committee should be aware of or really focused on, like immediately, that we may have missed?
I don't think so. I think you've got a pretty good handle on what's right in front of you that should really be getting done. I think what would help shape it going further forward is some of the, I won't quite say policy, but objectives of we'd like to move to this kind of fuel, we'd like to move to this kind of lighting. You know, we have an objective to have the schools be leading in energy efficiency or something like that. So that would then let you start to drive a little bit of the discussion on biofuel versus oil versus gas. And ultimately, as you said, if it's a funding source, they're going to dictate quite a bit of it. And biofuel is great if you can get it. And so there's a number of pieces like that. But I think you're pretty well understanding what the buildings need at this point. And if not, we can just continue to illuminate that for you as you get further and more in touch with the report and say, you know, what do you mean when you keep repeating this? The two that Matt brings up, I would prefer to fix we can either address it through an errata sheet, like here's a response to this point that comes up here and here and here, or actually just go back in and reprint the pages or whatnot. They're kind of borderline errata sheet, but anything with drinking water starts to prey on people's minds. If it's in the report and it's saying this is an issue, if it's not, I think we'd be better off just getting it out and saying this is a report that incorporates comments from the committee, and here's a revision date, and that way that one's done, because that'll get legs. If it's just old signs hanging around, let's just go get rid of them.
You know, and as he was mentioning the ability to get the biofuel, I now am recalling when they were doing the assessment, one of the issues that we came across was the storage.
Storage of biofuel is very challenging. Yeah, and I don't think that oil's a better option than propane. I just think there's some other technologies out there that are more energy efficient than propane. And having done a lot of new school constructions, granted most of them are in Rhode Island, they're getting away from fossil fuels in general.
Yeah.
As is the city of Boston, Brookline, many other places, trying to get away from that dependency on fossil fuel.
Yeah.
And it could be too the fact that the Millville boiler project was more of a retrofitting and kind of replacement, but matching it to the existing system specifications. So that could have been why as well. So then,
So I'm sorry, Matt, I don't mean to interrupt you. Just one other question as I'm sitting here looking at this. So you've done the Millville upgrade. So as I'm on 2-46 right now, it's called out of upgrading the boilers, pumps, and everything else in Millville, and that's already been completed?
I believe we did our analysis in February or March, and that project we knew was coming. And we finished up writing the report, and then the project followed it.
Yeah, is that the same with the existing intrusion detection system? Didn't you upgrade that? Did you upgrade that at Millville?
the camera, there's camera systems that were updated. The actual the alarms, the general shell of the alarm system is the same.
Okay.
So is that something else that you guys do you recommend that we make any changes for recent, like the boiler piece in Melville, or
High school,
the security
Security vestibule.
security vestibule?
I think if we're going to go in and get it updated as per a particular date, say May of 2021,
Is what we read.
then we'll just go through, tag everything that's been done, get all the different changes out, and just publish it as updated, and mothball this one as out of date, and have a new one, and shows progress to the town, and it recognizes the investment you're doing.
That's helpful. Appreciate that. We can talk further.
Yeah, if you
about
have a
that.
list of what you've done.
I was gonna say, we probably want to take a good inventory of anything and everything that has been done, and maybe we want to fast track a couple of extra little things prior to revisiting the report. This is one of those years where I think we have slated actually on the next school committee to discuss the possibility of some smaller capital projects that we're looking to potentially fund from E&D. So there may be some additional pieces, particularly around if there's some stuff for ADA compliance.
Mhm.
So I think as we as a committee move forward or as a district move forward, then we can set a kind of stop deadline and bring the information back and revise the report. That makes sense.
Well, even if we say you take the next 4 weeks or so, go through, list out everything you've done, list out any changes that are in here, we'll get a determination on the water system, and then just make a list of things that are meant to be addressed or potentially
Pending.
addressed in the summer of 2021, and that can just go in right at the beginning of the report, saying this is what's anticipated for this coming year.
Mhm. Sorry, just taking some notes. Was there any, so for question 2, were there any questions about or disagree with any of the statements or recommendations that were made in the report? Again, the first two questions were really clarifying questions. And then the third one is what brings us to the next step in this process, so to speak. Matt, did you have any thoughts on any of the statements that were made, if you felt
No, a lot of my notes that I made are more topic points
General.
that I wouldn't want to hold up their time with that kind of stuff. It's things that I think as a group would be good to discuss because some of them are pretty easy to make some changes, especially if you're going to do a header page of and here's what we've done. There's a couple of things that I found that are pretty easy changes that can be made.
Okay. I mean, in terms of text within the
No,
report? or
no,
just
so
comments?
LED lighting. There's a
Right.
humongous incentive in Massachusetts right now. It's $1 a bulb for LED lights,
Right.
and you just go through particular distributors to buy them.
Mhm.
And if the school is maintaining their own light bulbs and changing their bulbs, you could literally just buy a stack of LED bulbs, and it's an inexpensive fix to save yourself a ton of energy.
Right.
So I have a bunch of those points coming through here that are things that are listed out here as addressing that there are some solutions for that are not quite as catastrophic.
That was one of the things I wondered about. I did that at the last district that I was working for. We replaced just the bulbs in the fixtures, and there were tremendous savings. But I was wondering about whether or not the actual ballasts or the equipment, if there's any benefit to changing those over as well, as opposed to just going the route of
The newer LED bulbs will work even with an older ballast.
yeah.
And is your energy loss in the ballast as bad as the bulb? For an inexpensive kind of mid-step, changing to an LED bulb, especially where the incentive in Massachusetts right now is staggeringly astronomical. They'll pay huge portions of the bulb costs. I think your minimum investment is like $1 a bulb. Now, granted, there's still 100 bulbs just above our head, but
Oh yeah.
it's an easy way to save that energy consumption. And then you mentioned you mentioned low flow fixtures and auto flushing toilets in here a million times.
Right.
Unfortunately, being a small water district, there's no incentive for that here. But how many of those things, could easily be taken on in pieces that would make the schools much more energy efficient, and would reduce your operating costs, which then gives you more capital to play with to do some of the bigger things that need to happen, like all the glass in this building.
Yeah.
Some of those, I don't know about Millville, Blackstone's a green community. So the buildings owned by Blackstone could qualify for green communities grants.
Millville,
Millville has one
Was
too.
too.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
Millville did, I thought the bulbs in M&S.
There might be an upgrade from that upgrade, but there was a big energy grant in Millville. But I mean, we may be more advanced than that now.
yeah.
I think it's still in the front encasement, when you walk into Millville. There was a presentation, from National Grid and other, God, that was a long time ago.
I didn't think it was the ones after that, because, the former chair of the board of selectmen, Joe, got an I'm okay with that.
There's so many extras over there, Jane.
So one of the things, to mention, there's probably a number of things that are in here that are more of like low hanging fruit. And, Jim and Greg, please jump in, from our conversations. One of the things, and I turn this to the committee members as well, a topic of conversation was like, what do we want the focus of this group to be on? Do we want this group to be trying to iron out some of the smaller one-offs or even potentially maintenance-based issues? Or do we want this group to be a larger scale capital planning body that will drive forward like the 5-year trajectory for building usage and where students are and what potentially could happen?
As a question to that, is there someone who handles, or is there a group who handles the maintenance issues and all of that, or is that something else that that the school committee needs to, the school, the towns, whatever, needs to address? I mean,
We don't have a small group, so I was actually, when you were talking about this, I'm wondering if that's something maybe we want to do like a working group from this committee to identify the little, the smaller specific things.
there's a stack of low hanging fruit on this
Yeah.
on this report that could be cleaned up with a couple of weekends and a little bit of extra work.
Yeah.
I mean, and some of it's bigger stuff. Others are simple restaining decks and things. But in Millville, you mentioned the catch basin that's overrun with plants.
Mhm.
I mean, those are the kinds of low hanging fruit stuff that you could pick off real quick and easy, and then you then get to put out this great report of all these things you've checked off of this report. And then someone to you keep that, if you keep that small working group together.
Yep.
It becomes interact with the schools and figure out where things need to get done and try to get those coordinated out through.
Yeah. So I think to your point, that's exactly what I was thinking. Like a small working group from this group would be beneficial, because then we could maybe plug away at some of that low hanging fruit, but bring that information back also to this group, and kind of see, help drive the larger scale plan forward. I'm certainly interested. Obviously, I would be a member of the smaller working group.
I would happily jump in.
I have my first member. Is there anyone else that's interested in joining for like a smaller working group on low hanging fruit? In fact, why don't we do this? Why don't I just reach out to you via email? You and I can set up a time, and then I'll send it out to the group when we're going to meet, and then if anyone can make it or whoever can make it, we'll start that way. Does that make sense to people?
Okay.
Because I think from a perspective of the school committee, this group needs to be that bigger picture.
Right, because this is, and this is where I was getting a little bit mixed up
Yeah.
initially. When I said, well, I signed up for the facility subcommittee. That was more what
Like the
you're
low
talking about.
hanging, right?
The low hanging fruit.
So, we have a facilities working group that we will form to look at these concrete,
Day to day.
actionable pieces that we want to take care of. But we need to discuss what the capital planning subcommittee is going to do. We have all of this information. What are we going to do with it? Like, what is the next thing that we need to do? We talked about the master plan. Does anyone know what does everyone know what a master plan is? Where we're looking at the big picture. Where do our buildings need to be to accomplish what we're setting out in our district strategic plan? Right?
Right, exactly
So
right.
what do we do next?
And with that being said, I just want to, I think it's important to have that big picture. So if there are any of the low-hanging fruit items that would be costing us more than it should, and is part of our bigger plan, is it something we need? So we need to know what that goal is,
Right.
and make sure we're not building a wall that we're going to take down to.
I think hence the importance of it being a little working group as part
As
of this.
part of this, as opposed to a
So
separate committee.
as Matt, myself, and potentially others meet to talk about some of these little ongoing projects that we can start chipping away at, and we could bring back what the costs of those projects would potentially be, and whether or not we want to, decide to move.
Well, and as being part of this larger group, we're privy to all of the, okay, well, we know that the plan is to demolish this building, so why are we
Right.
going to do any major work on this building?
Right. Like, why are we going to go? Maybe not. The bulbs aren't probably a good example, but
No,
why are
but
we going to
that's-
go switch out all the bulbs at the high school if we're going to be like taking out a wing or
Right.
not using a wing?
Right.
Yeah,
Right?
correct. And
So-
that's kind of the benefit of it being a working group versus a completely separate.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that makes.
So with that being said, the work of that smaller group is very important
Mhm.
and time is of the essence. So we know what we're working with, I think.
I think the first step though would have to be knowing your master plan, because knowing.
Correct.
Right.
So like you pulled quick numbers together. We've got 1,700 students in this town. In this district. I apologize. I don't mean to offend Millville.
We're a community of one.
There you go.
It's a-
Well, I mean, I said this town,
Yeah.
talking to someone about the school district
Yeah.
when I was having a conversation with someone, actually with a couple of students, and was literally reminded that some of them
Oh,
were from
geez.
Millville and not from this town. So
Yeah.
I didn't want to offend anyone.
Well, we could hold our meetings in Millville and you could say the same statement.
See, and then I would offend myself being a black
For purposes of this committee, if we accidentally say town, we mean district.
Community.
So we have 1,700 students.
Yeah.
How consistent has that been? And I asked that question because I don't know.
It's declining. It's declining at a slow given percentage, but it is definitely on the decline. There is not a forecast of an upswing, although it could potentially upswing next year based on how many homeschool people come back into we generally run around 1,800, and we had a big drop off this year because many people chose to homeschool as a result of COVID. So if those groups of people come back, it could potentially have look like it's an upswing, but it's really not an upswing. It's just kind of down from where we were the last time we were really looking at the numbers.
Can I just ask a clarification
Sure.
question? You say homeschool, I assume you don't mean remote
I don't
school.
mean remote.
Okay, thank you.
I don't mean.
My child remote schools currently, and
They're
We're
still
still
counted in
counted on our.
Yeah, remote
to
are the
homeschool.
1,700, yeah.
so
No.
could we get numbers for the past 5 years?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if we sit at 17 to 1,800 students, well, none of our buildings equal out to those kinds of numbers of where we need to be, and give you that 10% cushion, I believe is what you said MSBA allows.
Yeah.
You could do that with just the high school and the middle school, 1,740. So, I mean, if you're, so how do you make no 3 schools work out to make sense? And do we know what the numbers would be K1 and 2 when the Millville Elementary transition is done, where all of the K1 and 2 are just at Millville?
Yeah, we haven't said.
Yeah.
We do, we
400.
have all of those
Yeah.
numbers. I don't have them off the top of my head.
In the K1,
They'll
they're
end up like
projections.
400 at both elementary. give
Yeah,
or take.
eventually they're gonna be around
Yeah,
around
450.
400.
450. Yeah.
And we must have some projection of growth based on
We do,
the new neighborhood.
We do, but it's really hard. We take census data, and it's just so hard. We did one year. We tried to project out, and I think there was a year that there were no births. There were no births in Blackstone and Millville, and so we're like, well, they're going to have a kindergarten class of two because it could be from the year before or whatever. But we have such movement now in these both communities that it's like take census data doesn't really, like, it's just so fluctuating. We have a homeless population now that we never counted on before, and so we have projections, but they're just based on past.
So by movement, are you moving internal to the town or in and out of the town?
In and out.
Yeah. And for
And
people that
particularly
leave,
on the
people
Rhode
that-
Island border,
Right. And people leaving are being replaced by the same number of people coming in?
for the most
So
part.
it's not a next migration?
Yep, yeah,
We have school choice, which
oh, yeah.
in and out.
Yeah, there does get to be a point where, short of a significant change in employment opportunities, either up or down, you'll get to pretty much a stasis.
Yeah, yeah, and we, you know,
Probably what
it
you're approaching.
really our movement now is not based on employment or jobs coming in. It's really based on rental properties available. And the more rental properties available, the more we seem to get people in, and so.
And the hope for the district is that as we're making these changes in our instructional strategic plan and we start incorporating pieces like, as we've been focusing on the career pathways and real some hands-on opportunities, that will help change the population of the district by both retaining some of those students that have traditionally gone to vocational programs and drawing people from other communities to come in
And there may
be a
be
part of that.
uses for the facility in that regard, for some of the facilities in that regard. So in other words, they become an adult education center with career focused, or an early childhood center with, you know, more than pre-K. But I think this committee is really gonna have to look at what some of those potential things might be and plan that 5-year kind. As much as the regional agreement subcommittee had a tough job because they had to move an age-old agreement, this group has an even tougher job because you're talking about, you know, how do we best use buildings people have been in since Aaron was in school here. And you know, and but we have to make those kinds, I mean, that's, I think, from a school committee perspective, and there's lots of school committee people here, but that's what we're looking for. Like a plan that says, moving forward, we envision the use of this building to look like this, and we'll repair it as such, and
Yeah, that's just to your point, numbers, because I happen to have handed out at the Millville town meeting the budget book that I presented, and there's some demographic information in there. So to your question about the elementaries, we're spot on. Right now, so next year's numbers are kind of based on this year's numbers, but only because with COVID, it was such an uncertainty of who's coming in and going. So for this year, the originally anticipated enrollment was about 1565 in district. And next year, we're trying to keep it at about the same. And the numbers for Millville Elementary look like 258 students for next year. But at the complex for next year, there'll be 500 students because we're not finished with the transition. So
We know that transition is happening, so I think,
Yeah,
I think we
exactly.
plan based on
so
that
close,
actual transition.
So it's
That's
close
about
to
100.
right. So it's close to about 370. It's between 375 and 400 when all
Even
is
with the
said
rest of the
and done.
space at the complex.
well, one wing was turned into the administrative district offices.
Which way?
The
I
section
don't know. I
in
don't know the complex enough to.
in JFK, the back section that has like right off that separate
Along
parking lot.
Mendon.
The third grade.
Oh, by the old third grade way. Thank you.
Yeah,
I went to JFK. I know the
apologize.
school, so.
That
Okay, so the same
historical
school
reference
since
was
you were
gone.
in school here. There we go.
Yeah, well, but
Yeah, the central offices took a few of the classrooms, and
Okay.
they're kind of separated, and we have that. The parking lot there is the central office entrance now.
Mhm.
So parents can't just walk in and then get into the classrooms. So we had all of that
So that cuts out 4 or 5 classrooms that were up in that wing. What do you do with the rest of? I mean, you're talking about a school that can handle 800 kids, and you're gonna have 400 in there. I mean, you essentially could you could put all of the kids probably without too much challenge in just the AFM side of that building. And then what do you do with the remainder of the building? Because you're just going to continue to pay to heat it and cool, or well, you're not cooling anything in this town, but you're going to pay to heat it and keep security and lights on and.
That's the essence of the committee like
That's
this.
exactly, I was just
No,
gonna
but
throw
like-
that right back at you. That's what we have to decide.
Because what will happen is your working group is going to be very effective at picking low-hanging fruit for about 1.5 years, 2 years.
Mhm.
And at that point, you're going to start running up where the cost of fixing it has to be measured against the cost of the building as a whole, or the value of the building as a whole. So you've got that little window there, but you can't wait till you get to it to start thinking about what do you want to be as a district. And that's the thing that came through the report over and over and over again is what are you going to do? You've got too many buildings and too much space.
So I'm not sure how many students we send out for needs. I know when Carl and I did Sturbridge Elementary, that one whole wing is all OT, PT, and full care. And that brought in students from multiple districts. It came out, it was a beautiful wing. So then we're not paying and we're getting students in.
I mean, if you're talking 1,600 kids a year, you could literally eliminate 2 schools, 3 schools technically, because complex is 2 different buildings.
We originally did have in our budget this year to expand preschool, but that position was taken out, right, Jane?
No, there are
No, we did.
intentions.
Yeah,
yep,
we are,
there's
yeah.
intentions to expand the preschool program, definitely.
And with President Biden's vision, there is the vision of adding 2 years of preschool as part of, I mean, we all know that takes time, but I think that would be amazing for our early childhood center. In years to come, we already have the space for that, if that ever does come.
I think
over
that's
to
a great point. So for this group, that's definitely one of those things that we should be factoring into our decision-making processes, the potential expansion of preschool.
Yeah.
Right. And we already have the space over there for that, so.
Well, and really, what do we want education to look like in this community, and what is the space we need in order to achieve that? So it's the district of, it's the portrait of a graduate working backwards.
So unfortunately, for a few years, I think we're definitely have an abundance of space, but we'll have something that we're working towards to make it more efficient
But if
and
you're-
more useful.
If you're talking about a student population that you don't anticipate changing from 1,600 in any foreseeable future, 1,700 even,
Even if it went to 2,000, you still have
Those
you still only need 3 of your 5 buildings.
Correct.
And
Right.
that's where, can you find enough uses for the JFK AFM complex to make it feasible hanging on to and continuing to spend money in and picking off just the low hanging fruit? Is there anything in that makes any kind of sense when ultimately I think the biggest thing this group is going to be working on is what the new high school is going to look like? Because that building is just long past its useful existence.
I agree.
There's nothing in
agree
that
with
building
that.
that is salvageable from looking through this report. I mean, there was nothing in this report that made that high school seem like I'd want my kid in it tomorrow.
As a long-term goal, I agree.
I think that needs to be one of the first focuses, though. Is so if the vision of this school is you go back to a high school, middle school, as you had mentioned last time we were here, then what does that high school become? What grades are incorporated into it, and what space do you need to retain from there? Which buildings make the most sense to turn into something else? Because that's probably your first point before you figure out what do you do with this extra wing in the JFK. Well, do you even need this building at all anymore? Could you get enough out of your other structures to eliminate those overhead costs?
You've got that. You also have, you mentioned special needs programming, early childhood, career path. You also have student transition, 18 to 22 transition programming. what might be worth looking at is within a reasonable radius of here, what are other districts offering and what are they lacking? And can you start with some kind of regionalization for those type of offerings?
I think that's in progress too with our
Okay.
pathways.
Yep.
Right.
Where are they housed right now? Those programs at just various
The
schools?
18 to 22 transition?
No, the
Oh, no.
career pathways.
So
At the various schools, and then one in Northbridge at the whatever center. The CNC manufacturing one is just like at a hub.
Yeah,
Is that
'cause nothing
Northbridge or
saying-
Uxbridge?
Nothing saying you need to bring them here, but acknowledge that they are somewhere else.
It
'cause
would
that
be
helps
nice
you
to
then
bring
bottom
them
line
here.
your needs.
Right.
I think we're working on that.
And I haven't stepped foot in the high school in a long time, Matt, so this is probably directed more at you. Are things like the automotive shop and the carpentry shop, the woodworking shop still being used in the school?
The woodworking is definitely being used
It's
and
robotics.
growing, and the automotive is now more of a what's Chris do? The robot,
Robotics.
people,
robotics
the
and
robot
technology,
dude
STEM.
person. Sorry.
What isn't
That's
being
not
used is the
high
home ec. Although I think that might be the life skills.
Some, yeah.
Well, I was gonna say,
Yeah, I
but
think
home
they're-
economics, I mean, talk about a class that every kid I've interviewed for the last 5 years could use is how to iron a shirt.
Life skills.
I mean,
is-
it's just
How to write a check. I mean, I
How to
know
do
you
your-
don't do it. I know you do
Well,
it.
we
on-
have
How to
that.
sign in
We have
cursive.
personal finances here.
We do.
how to balance your checkbook, how to do your taxes. Like
Life skills 101. We just
Yep.
came up with a
I
great
spent the
course
last
load.
month teaching all of my apprentices how to be adults and do their taxes and make sure that they took care of all, because
It's
they had
true-
no
it's
clue
true.
and they
They
didn't
have
know
no
they didn't know
clue.
who to ask for help.
Nope. Nope.
And those are the things that I think you could do with some of those spaces, which is actually why I asked about the automotive one, because there are in perusing through all of the research I was doing, trying to make sure I could learn about schools. There were a lot of things in the state where you could actually, if you have a program like an automotive program, and you can actually, the program can actually have after hours where you can actually use it to retain money. I know they talk a lot about
Correct.
culinary programs and things like that, where you can actually bring in so much revenue for those programs to be able to pay for the
You
space.
talked about that last time. I think you guys did. Yeah.
Yeah, we see it in some of the VOTEC schools that will make spaces available for people outside of school.
Career learning and things of that nature. And I mean, that's why I asked about woodworking, because there isn't a guy I know in the trades who wouldn't tell you there's a shortage of help in, in actual labor, which can bring up a whole other set of conversations. But so when you talk about 18 to 22 transitioning program, what kinds of things are you talking about? Is it like
It's-
job readiness? Is it
Yeah. there's
ESL
life skills,
kind of
job
programs? I
readiness, yeah, ability to live on your own. It's
It's for
Special
special
needs.
needs.
It's special needs.
For special needs
Students.
students who probably got a certificate of attendance, not a diploma, and still need to continue learning to live on their own.
Like the capabilities program.
Yeah.
So what stops this? So what stops this district from getting some kind of additional programming in the form of like job path training for people who aren't special needs? I mean,
Budget.
Woonsocket's
Budget.
well,
It's
but
budget.
if some of those programs are pay to attend, I mean, is that something that can be looked at? Where
Well,
how
they
many
are
people
now
walk
because
out with just a
the,
basic
because
education and
the
don't know what to do with their life?
regional agreement allows for a fifth year training program. So yes, we are capable of doing that now.
That
As
just
of this year.
that just was introduced with the amendment of the regional agreement.
Okay.
and part of what limits you is you're right up against a different state. So your catchment area and any other district would also extend south. Here, if you go south, the only thing you get is someone from Rhode Island. You don't want them here. So,
Yep.
You don't want them here if it's being paid for by the state because you can't transfer money that way. But if you put in a job training program
That they pay.
that
to
they paid
attend.
for themselves. I mean, there's plenty of people in this town who have life skills that they can teach that, would be able to drum up something to put together a life readiness, give these kids a chance to learn. I mean, how many 18-year-old kids walk out of school, can't go to college, can't afford college, and have no clue what to do with the rest of their life? They weren't smart enough to get into the new Voc Tech programs because of how hard those applications now are to get in. How many of those kids could you turn that into where you're going to use some of this space and utilize it and be able to help out not just this town, not just this district, especially with Woonsocket and Central Falls being not very far away from us.
you'd be the first district that I've seen successfully cross the state line in New England. We worked with a district for a little while up in New Hampshire and Maine, and they were trying to actually New Hampshire,
couldn't do
Vermont,
it.
and they were trying to do it. It's
And what is the roadblock?
transfer of money from state to state.
Yeah,
But if it's
But we
paid
do it
out of
for other-
pocket,
yeah, but
Right,
it's still,
yeah,
it's
we
still
do it
in your
for-
accounting system. So I work in Rhode Island for doing some of this kind of stuff, actually, and we looked for a long time to try to have accept Massachusetts folks because they can come to the college, but they can't come into these programs just because of the way you have to budget the dollars and the cents.
The
So
model
Mass
that
can't
might
go to
be
Rhode
worth-
Island, but I don't know if Rhode Island, I don't know.
The model that might be worth looking at is BOCES over in New York, Boards of Cooperative Educational Services, because they cross districts, and the districts in New York are not specific to a town. They're more geographical, so you're not busing kids across rivers and that kind of stuff. There might be some structure within the BOCES framework that might work for something like you're talking about. Because that was the VOTEC system for years in New York. That's how you got to it. But they cross county lines, they cross all kinds of things with that system. So
How do we pay the tuition to send out-of-district placements out of state? Don't we have out-of-state?
Yeah, we do have people in Rhode Island.
They're direct to the institutions that the places go.
But that's district money, right? We're paying it out of the district.
yeah.
Not like we're
It's in
getting a
our-
state.
So it's not like a school choice. They're not school choiced into those, or
They're placed.
they're placed. So it does. It comes out of the actual district budget.
Okay.
So we have lines for out of state or private tuitions that we do pay. But similarly, I imagine that the same could happen from other states. I'm not familiar.
You're talking
I
about
don't know. I mean, I think
adults.
we lay it out on the table and we see where the chips fall. And, if somebody came over and said, I'm willing to pay you X $1,000 to be in your shop class in the evening or whatever, there are a lot of companies that will do, if they think they're going to develop a workforce, there are a lot of companies that will support programs, particularly the CNC end of things.
Well, I see it even being almost its own entity, own separate budget, separate program.
It's a program that would essentially rent space off the school district, was my thoughts of it, where there's space here that can be utilized. It's an after hours program. It's a tuition based program where someone has to pay their own tuition. And then it's just can you get it accredited enough to get any kind of federal aid for it, federal student loans for it, anything along those lines. Those would be the stipulations with it. But there's so many career training programs out there that are housed in a half a warehouse because that's just where they are.
So we'd almost need a community college to come in and bring it to our community versus us creating the.
But you could talk to someone like UTI. I mean, New England Tractor Trailer School did it. They converted from their just tractor trailer training. Now they offer, I think, 3 or 4 different vocational programs. So people like that might be worth a contact with.
What was the company you were saying?
UTI, Universal Technical Institute. They have campuses all over the place.
I feel like if we could do something along that maybe ran off of one of our pathways, like it would be a continuation for some of the kids, possibly.
Yeah.
You may also reach out to some of the, so like Bristol Community College rents space in a lot of schools. Now, granted, they're more that way, but there's got to be someone like a Quinsigamond that would love a remote campus to
Right.
be able to do a couple of classes.
I think the pandemic has changed a lot of that.
It has, but it's ending
Yeah.
tomorrow.
It's on the downslide.
Or May 29th, I don't know.
And most learners still prefer in-person learning.
Well, and some of them you have to.
But even
Particularly with technical
Particularly-
programs.
well, with
Yes.
technical but even just a basic math course, it's a million times easier to
yeah.
have your instructor right in front of you versus
So this
Read
year
this
we
book and
had
figure
the
it out.
Jane can,
biomed.
Jane can attest to
And it's
that.
100% easier for the instructor.
I will attest
We
to
had the
that as well.
biomed pathways, and I can tell you that my two seniors took it in the first semester, and that's just the way it fell this year. That it was a semester versus a full year. But obviously, there are things we're not going to expand to with high school kids. But I'm sitting here thinking, like, if we had a phlebotomy option for adults, or first aid EMT piece coming out of that. Once they graduate, it would kind of roll off of what they did in that semester, from what I saw. I mean, it's definitely a bigger conversation, I think, but
Yeah, I think
I
it's
think
it's
that's the
entire.
big conversation.
Yeah.
Right. I think bringing that sub conversation back to the larger
committee.
conversation, I think it is an entire conversation / set of meetings unto its own with respect to, okay, what kind of programs can we bring into this facility? Who are the population that will fill these programs? I wonder sequentially, where does that fall in line with our process? Is that like, maybe that, and again, I defer to you guys or ask from your expertise, is that type of specificity later on down the line after we say, this space would be perfect for X, Y, or Z. What could then the programs look like? Who would be making them up? And, do we have partnerships with
Not to jump
colleges?
in front
Yeah,
of
no,
you.
please.
But we need to know XYZ before we can do that, right? So we have the portrait of a graduate. We're going to need to review that and bring
yeah,
it
we should
Yeah.
bring that in.
so that we can figure out what do we need to have this as our product. That sounds horrible. But for our kids to accomplish this.
Yeah. Well, and I do think you have to think like big, and then bring it down. So if in fact we say the high school is not appropriate for the high school anymore. Maybe the high school comes here, but if it came here, we have to add a bigger auditorium. We have to add a bigger gymnasium. We have to add on certain, spaces, or increase certain spaces, or do certain things outlined. We have the classroom space, but we might need other, bigger cafeteria or a more appropriate cafeteria, whatever those things are. And then that says, okay, that frees up a building there, but we don't want to leave an idle building that just gets demolished in time. Maybe that becomes a music center, sports center, certain things during the daytime, because the facilities are there, and can be expanded there. So a student who has music class, how do we shuttle students back and forth during the day, or whatever, but I think you guys have to do some of that big picture to then bring down the narrow.
That's why I say sequentially, where does that piece fit in? Like, I feel like we need to identify what we want happening within the district and across what buildings.
Right.
And then if we've said this spot is going to become more of a program, a
After
BOCES
hours,
or an
adult.
after hours, BOCES, whatever it is, then we can get on to the specifics.
It's an old term to me. Oh my God.
One of the things that
I grew up
I'll
I didn't grow up in New York, but I
It's
lived
still
in New York.
still in use though.
speaking.
But I think, Matt, I think you're heading in the right direction, looking at the lower elementary, early childhood piece of how do we group this together and what do we do with it. The next gorilla in the room is going to be, what do you do in middle school, high school? And so how amenable is the district to a combined middle high school? And then what shape would that take? What would the program look like? Then overlay it on your two buildings and go, where does it fit? And if it's not that, then is it a lower elementary, intermediate school, high school type of arrangement? And look at the population you have, look at the locations, and then overlay that, build a program for that and overlay it on these buildings. And I think you have less of a concern with travel and catchment area, because the difference between coming here and going to the high school site is almost negligible when you're on a bus from the far end of town. It's a couple more minutes. And so that, which frequently becomes an issue in regional districts, I don't think it's much of an issue for you. Then I think you'll end up knowing that I need a little bit of this and less of what I own over here. So what can I do with that? The easy one is I can take it down. And then you go all the way through what do you need from a town point of view? Do I need housing? Do I need this? Do I need that? And then what do I need? What could I potentially provide? So if we went from what do I need to, what could I do to it, to what could I potentially do with it, and look at them in that order of importance, then you'll be coming at it from the point of view of the educational mission. Of what can we do with this? Because ultimately, anything that tries to do it by, if we created this,
Yeah.
is going to rely on a
Oh.
force of personality.
Absolutely.
And when that fades, which it always does, the program's got to continue on its own, otherwise you've invested in something that doesn't work.
The crux, the piece that I am coming back to in my mind, and I know we're just kind of spitballing thoughts and questions right now. This has come up in smaller conversations.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking
I don't know
about,
how they work,
okay,
but
we
I
have
think
like an
you're
early
the engineer,
elementary.
you-
We have an early elementary idea. We know that we're going to be pushing preschool potentially for an additional 2 years. When we are talking about our portrait of a graduate, and I bring that back to our blueprint for improvement, and I know that regardless of the next iteration of the blueprint for improvement, one of those pieces will always be the whole child. And that brings me not just to the social emotional piece, but to the physical well-being. And I think about the fact that, you know, we have our buckets. We have our early elementary, we have our middle elementary, and then we have our upper grades. The fields are all at the high school. So when we say, you know, you wouldn't want to put your kid there next year. And again, I'm not saying that, you know what I mean.
Should be a
It's,
sophomore. she'll
it's
be
pretty
there, but-
valid. It's pretty valid. It could be a valid point. The question then becomes, let's say we were to move away from that actual building. Well, I don't know that we would ever want to abandon that property,
Right.
so to speak,
Right.
because all of our athletic fields are there and the potential for those fields. Or is there space somewhere else in the district to recreate those fields, or would that be necessary? Those are some of
Is there
the.
a budget number you guys use when you look at renovate versus replace for buildings?
They're pretty close to one another. They're right
So,
now.
so dollar per square foot costs are roughly
500.
the same on a major renovation versus a major replacement.
And you may have explained this at the last meeting, I'm sure you'd be, if they go forward, if we decide to go forward, the Masco Building Authority makes you look at all the options.
But where we say the high school is almost non-repairable at this point with the fascia falling and doorways not being wide enough, and
Just
God
getting
knows-
it to code would,
Asbestos.
yeah.
I was leaving the elephants off the table for tonight. Lead, asbestos, high copper.
Right, because if we came up with a plan for the high school, odds are we would have to not actually use it for 2 years while all these renovations are being done. You'd have to move the kids to, so we, you know, it's not like you're going to close buildings if we're going to, so it's like that
And that's
trickle
why I say
effect, I
it,
guess,
it's,
circle.
you know, you take your portrait of a student. How do you get there? Does the middle high school? I mean, I went to a junior senior high when I was in Blackstone. It was the junior senior high school. Well, I was a techie, but I started at the junior high school.
First floor, seventh,
floor,
seventh and eighth grade.
I did one
Seventh and
year
eighth, purple,
junior
gold, and
high,
white.
and then we were 1 year of middle school for 8th grade.
Oh, they
Really?
moved you over
You're
here.
a townie too.
Yeah.
Yeah, purple, gold, and white,
On
lower B
97.
wing. You had a couple of classes
Oh.
that fit into C, and I mean there
Yeah.
were
Holy
6
cow.
grades in there at
I didn't know that,
150 to 180 kids per
It
grade.
was
and-
crowded.
I know. I was
I
trying to
remember
picture
that.
how all this, the junior high fit down there. I did have to go upstairs for one class.
You went up on one way, down on
So
one way.
Mary raises.
Sarah, you weren't ever there, were you?
Junior high.
Oh.
I left in 9th grade.
Is there a limitation to students in a classroom? Because, and I apologize, I don't know enough about your. Is it still 30? Is it 35? Is it?
25.
There's
Is there a regional? Is there a
18?
regional
there's
rule?
no there's nothing in our regional
Up to-
agreement that sets a limit
We will,
on
we
students.
will make reasonable accommodations.
35 is way too many. That's
Well,
Depends.
not.
that's the number in Massachusetts was no more than 35 students.
It depends on the class. You know,
Class.
elementary is going to have a much lower level that you want in than you're. You know, if you had a high school class that had 35 people, but it was a high school kind of a like, you know, everybody read from the book and. But I don't know. I mean, it's
Depends on the
doable.
class,
It's more.
I
doable.
feel like there used to be 30. I would love to go
I
into
feel
one
like
of
there
those
used to be
rooms.
30 kids
the
in all my
desks,
classes.
there was no room between the desks. They were same desks that they have now. Some are upgraded. And there were at least 5 rows. And it
Six
was
rows across,
desk
five
to
deep.
desk to desk, and I'm picturing my homerooms, and every year it was the same person in front of me.
Yeah.
Every year.
We're
But
alphabetical.
it was-
I
yeah.
I was slapping the same kid for 2 years straight.
And we were packed into those rooms, but there's not even a need for that based on our
Well,
enrollment
that's
anymore.
but when you look at that and say, okay, if you're talking about your main goal is essentially going to be, or whether it's a new high school, a remodeled high school, turning this building into a high school and trying to build all new fields and auditoriums and everything else, the MSBA rules are X amount of kids per square foot. Where do those numbers line up with what we're actually doing?
So that's a great question, and I was about to say before to Mary raised a good point, and we kind of knew it beforehand, but you're returning to it, which is MSBA is going to look at what your options are,
Right.
and they're going to want to know that you've explored your options. So I wonder, and I would ask you gentlemen, to what depth do the options need to be explored in order to be considered like realistic opportunities? Because the way I'm thinking now, we have a bunch of different possibilities for
Sure.
things that we could do within this district. And I'm wondering if it, again, and stop me because I don't want to go down the wrong path, but does it make sense to start outlining the big picture of what some of those different possibilities could look like? And then do we, to whatever extent, start going down the road of details to fill in the specifics for each of those potential models, and then at some point say, cross this one off, cross that one off, for whatever the reasons are.
That is a good way to do it. The MSBA will, if you ask them, will tell you that nothing is off the table, unless it is so obviously not workable. I mean, Holbrook went through it and ended up building a K through 12.
One building?
Yeah, serves the entire town.
So
and
so
they
with,
love it, and it works just fine.
so you take this report where it tells us in 2025 we need to be spending about $4.5 million on the complex. So that's, to me, this is like something you would show to MSBA and be like, why would we spend $4.5 million here when the high school is this much, and we can combine, get a newer, more efficient building and house all these students. So I think what it comes down to is, based on our student enrollment, would be MSBA would only be supporting a certain size building, right? So this is already part of our evidence to MSBA on why we need to move towards a new facility and why we wouldn't want to spend that money
Well, and
on a
part-
building.
Part of what you're doing here is you're getting, as we talked about last time, you're getting from your strategic plan through your facilities assessment to a master plan. And the broader you make the master plan in terms of what you considered and what your rationale is, the better off you'll be when you finally put a statement of interest together.
How much detail do those alternates have to include, though?
Not much. I think as long as you're consistent with it, like we considered
It
this
has to
grade
be. We have
arrangement, and here's how it fits into the buildings, and here's what it would do to transportation, here's what it would do to staffing, and here's the opportunity it would offer.
Okay.
And I think we can certainly develop, I think I got most of the areas. It's, there's not much past that, but it's all down to, the primary one is how does it affect the delivery of the educational mission? And secondly is what's the potential financial upside or downside? And if you look at those two broad categories, and in financial upside downside is both your capital costs and your operating costs. So if you took a building offline, your operating cost, in theory, goes down. Somewhere along the line, those cross when the building that you retain gets too big. But there's, if you establish that criteria, then you can just start filling in the boxes. Like, what if the high school went away? What would you do? You have to take all this program and find a place for it. Where does that fit? And just start blue skying that kind of discussion.
At what point do you make decisions, though, based on community potential to do, I mean, because you can, talk MSBA all till the cows come home, but that might be 56% of a $100 million project. At some point in time, when does the town appetite for, moving grade levels together or going back to junior I mean, at what point do you have to consider those kinds of things?
Before you finish writing a master plan.
There you go. Okay.
You need to take the effort that you're getting ready to set off on and bring it to the public.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
having a listing of ideas and then going to the public and say, here's everything we could think of, and here's how it works. Give us some input. And because you will be back out there in order to get through the MSBA. They'll need to see that involvement.
Do you want to paint with a really broad brush when you do that to the group, though, or do you want to? So if I were polling the audience and said, okay, here are the 10 different options we have to work with, or do you say, okay, here are the 2 ways that we're looking at how best do you want to narrow it down, or do you want to keep that brush stroke real wide?
Whatever you don't tell the public, they will make up on your behalf.
And it's, the Mass School Building Authority is very prescriptive. If we're gonna do a high school, maybe include 8th grade, so that we can field more teams and keep the kids in the high school. And a new high school is gonna keep kids here too, with the updated labs and, the updated technology, the things that they know. If you're building a high school, they'll participate in an auditorium and a gym. They won't participate in the second gym, but they'll participate in the first one. If you're building a middle school, you're gonna have a cafeteria. They're not gonna give you both. So you need to know those things when you're looking at which building you wanna build and which building you wanna keep. And then there's other things. And this building is built for middle school. So water fixture heights could be different heights if you decide to make this the high school. There's, and the labs in the high schools have just come so far with that Maria Korn method and what they expect.
This building would work better going back to upper elementary.
Right.
It would need some changes plumbing wise to be a lower elementary, up to 3rd grade. The toilets and fixtures and whatnot are lower. Above that, everything's pretty much the same. But that is kind of the push and shove. You cross the threshold with population at the high school level, and the gym gets bigger, and you get a gross motor skills room that comes with it. And
But could you do something though, kind of a makeshift? Is there potential for a makeshift where you say, okay, and I know we're on camera, but Millville is your early elementary. We have 2 years of preschool. We have kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade. I don't know, maybe even 3rd grade, and then eventually 3rd through whatever comes here after we build a new high school. But before we can build a new high school, we have to move the high school here
Right.
to do whatever.
you-
So can you flip in the process of flipping?
You would build that in because space, the education needs to go on, so wherever it goes, you need to account for that cost. And so you could do what Middleborough just did and build the new high school on the site of the old high school, keep the old high school running the whole time you're building the new one, move into the new one, take down the old one. That's not all that unusual.
Is
And
that what
way you're-
Lincoln did? You know? Is that
Lincoln remodeled their school.
what- Oh, it was a remodel?
Yeah, so they kept part of their old school, built part of a new school,
Yeah.
and then remodeled what they kept. So, and that was my thoughts at the high school was, because I remember you stating the gymnasium, the cafeteria, and the auditorium being a great space. Do you build off the backside of that school towards what's now I think it's still the soccer field, the fields that go down the hill, build out that way, and then demolish your front 3 wings and turn that into more parking and relocate
Fields.
your soccer field and
Yeah.
maybe your baseball field, depending on how far back you
Essentially
push.
what you would do with the high school is you would mirror image it. You take the classroom wing, just flip it over and build on that side. And then you're just down to what's the impact on the program when you are renovating the gym, the auditorium, and the cafeteria. And so, but you can know that's coming and you can kind of work into that.
Can you plan to do those as, like, could you plan to do we always call them the summer slammer projects in the construction world, but you've got a 3-month window of June, July, August to do this major retrofit. Because we do that in quite a few schools on the mechanical side of the world.
I think you could do your gym, certainly do your cafeteria.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can get through the auditorium.
But would minor intrusions in the auditorium be allowable?
Impactful for the school year? No.
Well, if you said your auditorium renovation goes from the last day of school in June to the Thanksgiving break, and you give up the fall production, but you get it ready for Christmas time, you could probably make that happen.
What fall production? Do
I don't think we have one.
I'll say there's a drama club.
There are
But they,
there are band
But
concerts.
it would be
outside.
nice
Well, that's
to
it.
expand.
But they're
most of
outside.
the bands were
in the fall.
it's the winter show right before Christmas, right before the holiday break.
Yeah.
So I don't want to offend anyone's religion. There's the drama club that's like 10 or 12 kids that does their
Yeah,
plays
no, it's
in the
not
winter, and
significant. It's not.
it doesn't seem like it'd be a huge impact to do that
But-
that kind
But
of. a
once we
remodel.
get this school district awesome again, these programs are gonna have tons of kids.
But they'd be so much more awesome in a brand new shiny auditorium.
Yes,
They really
It
would.
would be- Yeah, I think it would be a phased occupied renovation.
Yeah, I think that would be the best way to avoid the cost of modulars and temporary classrooms and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it's really going to come down to which one, how do you consolidate? And how do you make this work? And I think that's going to come down to your grade alignments and what fits where without thoroughly disenfranchising part of your population.
And then after everybody moves in, you decide if you declare the other schools surplus and give them back to the towns, or if you're gonna do something with them.
Is that allowable on MSBA guidelines? Can you just say, all right, well, we're not really sure what we're going to do with the Hartnett schools.
The
That's what
district
we're
would have to
saying.
vote to make it surplus, I believe, and then the town would accept it.
I think we're still living
It's a ways
out
off.
some of the accelerated repair projects that we've had on the buildings through MSBA. They still have to remain instructional.
But the way you explained it,
You just
yeah,
pay back the prorated.
they would be taking it off of our new MSBA. I think that's what they said.
Well, if you get to that point, there was an improvement made to a town-owned building. If you give it back to the town, it could be with the town picking up the prorated share through their share of a bond. So it wouldn't be cash out of pocket. It would just be, let's think out loud, if the complex goes back to Blackstone and the complex owns, I don't know, $1 million, and you borrow 60, then Blackstone would pay a proportionate share more than Millville, because they would get an improved building. It would be negligible to anyone paying the tax rate. It wouldn't even show up on your, it would be a rounding error in most people's checks. But that's one way to do it. But yeah, MSBA will want their prorated money back, one way or the other.
So the question becomes, which buildings are in the worst shape and need the most attention?
The high school.
So you say the high school, but I'll tell you, reading through this, I'm glad my
JFK,
kid's not in
IFM.
elementary school in the complex anymore.
Yeah.
Between asbestos and water problems and mold issues and carpeting over asbestos
And
and
water underneath the ground that's moving the building.
Asbestos is everywhere. If you're not disturbing it, it's fine. You know, to put carpet over the floor tiles, that wasn't unusual in the time. It's if you're buffing the tiles, you have the problem.
Or do we look at it as, if this is our building that we would be bringing students into from other schools, which population would best thrive?
do
Yeah,
you
do we take
get
5th through 7th in here and move 8th out?
more students? Do we get school choice students into Blackstone? Into
Yes,
into this
yes,
district?
yes. So we get
Is
about,
there a grade level that you get more of them at?
that was in our
I'll
packet
get
from our
it.
last
Hold on.
meeting. Of course,
I've
it's
got it
sitting in
right
my
here.
house. It was in our last
By middle
meeting's
school.
packet, the school in and out choices.
But we don't know
But I
when
don't
they
think
we don't
so.
know when they come in.
Oh, yeah, they're by school,
It's
so
just
they're
the
not by
numbers.
grade.
But if it's by school, all right. So if it's by school, do you draw more kids into the middle school?
No, it's by they town, like they came from Bellingham or they came from Uxbridge or they came
Oh,
from.
okay. Because I was gonna say, do you draw more kids for a school choice if you have a new state-of-the-art high school because now you have the only one around?
Right.
I mean, who else has a state-of-the-art school around here? You
I
have
think
the-
having a state-of-the-art high school could cut down on a lot of our kids who go to a vocational school, but not really intending to ever pursue a vocational.
just to get out of the school.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll see that. And who's right up the road here on,
Uxbridge?
Uxbridge just finished a high school, right?
Built a brand new school.
Yeah.
It's beautiful on the outside, the inside. they
Not laid
couldn't-
out well.
They couldn't finish.
Yeah, they ran out of money.
Yep. So they have the
Structural.
old desks that y'all used to sit at.
So does it behoove us to come up with like 3 options 4 options? Do we cut the chase and say, this is really what makes sense? I'm
I
not,
think it behooves you to do some brainstorming. To say, who are we educating and how can we best
doing
divide
that.
them up? And then once we figure out how we best divide them up, like, where do they need to be? And then where do they need to be? How do we get them there?
And Matt, if I can, Greg touched on this earlier. You're better served to really try to get all the families of options out on the table.
Yep.
And be as expansive as you can be. On that first cut, you can pretty readily go from there and say, out of 8, 2 or 3 just are non-starters, and here are the reasons. But what that gives you is somewhere down the road, when somebody in the community asks you, have you thought about X? The response can be, yes, we did. It was a great idea for these couple reasons, but here's why it didn't work for Blackstone Millville. And be able to set it aside and have people in the community know you've been as thorough as you can be. That's relatively an easy lift to be able to do it at that level. The deeper you go in, meaning the ones that survive that first cut, survive the second cut, once you get down further into the study, it becomes more difficult to extract them, if you will. So that's why I really would recommend make sure it's as expansive as it can be at the outset to give you that opportunity.
Is including costs in those kinds of conversations beneficial? Like, hey, option A is going to cost $100 million. Option B is going to cost $80 million. Like, does that?
No, you never float numbers.
probably not at the first.
Not necessarily, but for
brainstorm.
the first, I mean, one of the options is clearly keep things as we have them and repair them based on this report, and there's dollars associated
And we
with that
have
report.
that.
Yeah.
So doing nothing and repairing what we've got,
But
in other
doing
words, doing
nothing-
nothing by thing, there's numbers associated with that.
And doing nothing, essentially, if I'm understanding all of this correctly, is going to hurt our ability to get MSBA funding because of how oversized we are.
So that's why we do nothing goes off the list. But again,
No, but that's
yeah.
but
We
I
already
just
have
wanna
that
make sure-
answer.
Well, but making sure that you explain that to people,
Yep.
because if I say, if you came to me as a parent and I knew nothing about MSBA guidelines or anything, you said, all right, it's $50 million to repair the schools, it's $100 million to rebuild this and do major retrofits here and convert it over to this and this. As a taxpayer, I'm going to say, well, why are we going to spend the extra $50 million? Well, because at $100 million, the MSBA grant, the MSBA is going to kick in 60%, and really it's only going to cost us $40 million or whatever those numbers work out to be.
And the initial question is, why are we even looking into this? Why wouldn't we just leave everything the way it is? And the answer is, well, we can't.
Well, so, and is that
And
something?
it's going to cost us $100 million.
But is that
So
something
we-
that you address at each town meeting with a, here's kind of a conditional report of the district and some of the things that need to be done?
Yeah, see, now you've come back around to where you were before. You've got your little facilities working group, and every time you go public, you go, these are the ones we knocked off.
Right.
But we're getting to the point where the return on investment for these little things is going down. But wait, there's more, because the rest of us have been working on what are we gonna do? And when those two cross is probably a year and a half out for you guys. That's where you wanna be with this report, 6 months in advance, going, here's where it's gonna start to happen.
So by about a year from now, you really want to.
At next year's town, so
We
so
wanna have a
both
master
capital
plan.
planning groups from both towns expecting a plan from us, like, and they have been for, like, we're a couple of years behind the 8 ball, but we're moving. And so both are expecting a plan, and both are wanting to get into their capital planning based on our plans. So probably a year from now, at next year's town meetings,
Everyone's going to want to know some options, and by
Yeah.
that year from now, though, I will assume that we will have wanted to whittle down those options by focus group,
yes.
talking to parents and whatever.
Right, and have shared to the community.
I mean, the program has to drive the construction. We need to know, are we gonna plan for 2 years of preschool? I think that's a great idea. We have to have concrete things that we're gonna do.
Do
So-
we actually, sorry, go ahead, Matt.
No, I was gonna say I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I know Mary mentioned that she has a meeting at 7:30. My thinking is going towards what are our next steps, and I feel like so far what I'm hearing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming we want to use these meetings as those brainstorming sessions to put together the ideas
That big
of
master
what the
plan.
possible plans are. So, and I know that this book has a ton of information. I'm trying to figure out how do we make the most use out of our next meeting, because we won't finish these brainstorming sessions in half an hour. We know that. How do we make the most use out of this book and or the information in it? So I'm thinking, I wonder if it makes sense for the next meeting to put together some specific pieces of information that may already be in this book across the pages, like the space of the rooms in each of the buildings, room capacity, how many rooms, what our populations are. We put together the information that will help guide those options.
How many students per classroom are we putting in versus how many does MSBA say we should have in? Do those MSBA guidelines change per grade?
They do. I was going to say, and then we put together that information onto a 1 or 2 pager as opposed to a 500 pager. And then we start those brainstorming sessions here. And maybe whether we facilitate them ourselves or we bring in someone to facilitate them, we start laying out, well, based on this information, one option might be to move early elementary to this building, and these would be the classes. Move upper elementary to middle here. So does that make sense to people, like to start brainstorming at the next session that we have and put together the specific information that we would want at the table in order to brainstorm? So I think then for our next step here, what's the information that we would like to bring to the table in order to make brainstorming a possibility? Now, there might be some that's right off the bat we know, but maybe we can go through identifying what information do we want at the next meeting so we can brainstorm.
So I think one of them is what do you envision the district being? If you're looking 10 years out, do you envision the district being on the leading edge of delivering education? So, because that gets you down a particular building and a particular student-teacher ratio and a particular approach to curriculum. Do you go more of a mainstream, middle-of-the-road type of approach, which is maybe it's a little bit less hands-on learning, it's a little bit less flexibility in the classrooms, it might be a slightly higher student-teacher ratio, and that's going to drive you, because I don't think there's anything past those two at this point, really. And then that will drive you into what grade alignments are you comfortable with, and then what grade alignments do you think the public is comfortable with. And once you get past those, you can pretty much slice and dice the district up into school sizes and then fit it into the buildings. But I think you go back to your portrait of a graduate, your strategic plan, and your mission plan, and from what I've read of that, you're heading towards a kind of more of a project-based learning environment.
Definitely.
And that's going to drive the buildings. It'll drive your grade alignments more broadly if you're willing to do that and align maybe 8th grade up into high school and pre-K through 7th. Yeah, 7th grade is a tough one for teacher certification and curriculum, but it works. Pre-K through 8 works. And but then you start to marry that against what might the state participate in and what might the cost be. But that's got to be 3rd or 4th consideration down.
Matt, I'd also like to see if we can get what was asked for before in terms of at what grade level are people leaving the district? So are they leaving because, we've always said they're leaving from the high school because they're going to the tech schools, but those numbers are consistent every year. I mean, they fluctuate 5 or 10 here and there, but there's not 150 people leaving to go to the tech school. So are they leaving at kindergarten? Are they, and so we need to beef up early elementary.
And when are they coming in? And when are they coming in?
Right.
Yeah.
From those school choice questions. I think those are
So I don't know if that's even available to us, but that would be good data to have,
Definitely.
I think.
What you could do in the demographic way is find out where the Find out when they're leaving and then do follow-up on why'd you go. Reach out to them, say, can you just answer a couple of questions? We just really need to know why you're going somewhere.
I just wonder if we're on a cusp of a change, though, because of our regional agreement. We're going to see historical when they left, but that could change. And I think 2 years back when the charter school expanded, is it 2 years?
Yeah.
That might be something we can't really
Yeah.
use as data because it was a bubble
Right.
for that new space.
Or we just factor that in our
Yeah.
conversations. I mean,
But I know, I mean, I can only speak for my, daughter's class, her school year. There are more people that choiced out
So,
not because of for non-technical reasons. And they're still out.
and what years would you say that was?
When did that happen?
Yeah,
Oh, it happened all through the middle school.
it was middle school. I was just going to say, I think,
so
Some left
That age
6, some
group.
left 7, some left
Yeah.
8, but it was all the middle school. But
But
there's
then-
a good chunk of students
from that class.
from that class.
Yeah.
Are they leaving to leave the middle school or because of high school? That would be the curiosity question to that. So if you're choosing out in 6, 7, and 8, well, 8th graders who choose out, they're choosing for high school.
Yeah.
Whether it's the technical, the agricultural, the charter schools, whatever. What are driving those choices in 6 and 7?
Being unhappy with the district.
Because you can have a new and exciting building, but if it's not running right on the inside, then, there are,
Or the programs that keep kids engaged. And,
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
exactly.
So I think that all of that information is really important, and I think that we probably will only get that information from surveying families and kids. I don't think we have like a historical database of why kids chose to leave.
No, I don't think
Yeah.
we would have why, but I think we would have when.
We'll have
Like, I
when
think
and
we'd
numbers.
have
Yep,
when.
absolutely. So I'm wondering if that information kind of plays into after we have some potential scenarios, which scenario, makes the most sense. Like if we say, here's option 1, here's option 2, here's option 3, and then we look at those options through the lenses, well, multiple lenses, but one of them being, when is it that kids are leaving? Why did they leave at this point? What's drawing kids in? What's drawing them to the
But
district?
But if that data is going to take time to try to get.
Yep.
That's something we want to start working on right away if we want to have plans for a year from now.
Yep.
Because you're coming up into the summer when people are going to be a whole lot less responsive to any email that says BMRSD next to it.
Well, right. I agree. That's why I'm saying I think that information might help drive which option we choose. But while we're getting ready to get that information, what's the information to bring to the table immediately to start developing the options? Like how obviously it's enrollment projections.
So enrollment projections, the
Per
MSBA numbers,
per
and things
grade,
like that.
per
But
grade.
some of that information is going to be beneficial in putting together your options, because if you know that, we'll use Beacon Charter, right? So many kids left here to go to Beacon in Woonsocket for arts programs or for music programs or for any of those kinds of programs, and you lost 50 kids to that. Is there a way to bring that into? Is there a plan that you incorporate that's going to help keep those 50 kids here at whatever you get per kid, per
Can they
student?
go to Beacon?
I don't know. That was just the
It's just
easiest
a
school for me to pick
hypothetical.
on.
Yeah, no, I understand.
No, I was
I didn't want to grab the
I was
tech
going
school because
back
there's
to-
50 programs at
Yeah.
the tech school.
going back to the whole crossing state lines conversation.
But you can get your historical enrollment data very easily. You can correlate that to major changes in the district. When Jason and Matt came, you can correlate as it continued to decline and whatnot. Past that, you can get a demographer in here who could do all that work pretty quickly for you and be able to reach out to real estate agents, businesses, religious institutions and whatnot and say, can you give me a clue? And, I'm not from the district. I'm not here to do anything. I'm gathering data for them. And they can talk to faith-based groups. They can talk to the homeless, people who oversee homeless programs and whatnot, and get an idea of what's happening that way and bring that information back a bit more objectively. you went through the changes in district leadership, it'd be interesting to see if there's any correlation. Did things tail off once there was a change in leadership? And that would give you some good background to work with. But ultimately, you're going to come down to how do you deliver whatever you think the curriculum's going to be. That ultimately, that's going to be your fixing point, because you're not to make a significant impact on a program. You need to be assuring 50 kids in it every year. And so I don't think you're losing 50 kids in any one particular program. You're losing them to a tech school across a broad range. So that makes it a little bit more difficult. We're kind of back to where we were earlier. Don't create something on a force of personality. Create it because it has a bona fide reason.
So what makes the most sense for next steps? I think that Sarah, myself, anyone, we can maybe work with Jim and Greg to identify the needed information to bring to the table at the next meeting. And then maybe we use the next meeting as a brainstorming session to start putting out some general ideas. But then concurrently, I think we also start coming up with a plan to get more of that specific information. Because you're right, we want the meat of why kids leave and why kids come here, right? But we're not going to get that for the next meeting.
No.
But we need a plan to get that information so that we can start incorporating it into the decision making at some point. So I think that will be another piece of maybe the next meeting. We can set aside a little bit of time to talk about how to best get that data, what is exactly the information we're looking for.
Well, is that something we could just do through a group
We could
email?
do via email. Yep.
Yeah, just a group email of,
Yeah.
talk to kids. I mean, I assume we all have students or had students in the towns. Talk to the kids and talk to your own kids and your kids' friends and see if you can get any data that way that can be shared in a group to try to help point, is there something we really need to dig into in this? Or is that just, throwing against the wall and seeing if it sticks?
Yeah.
And
I was thinking the same thing even with the other information. I'm thinking I can be in touch, 4 of us can be in touch and come up with some general points of information and then put it out to the group via email and say, hey, this is what we're thinking we need to bring to the working table for the next meeting. Are there other things that you want to see? Are there other ideas that you have? And then we can kind of compile that data sheet that we'll bring to the table so everyone's sitting with it in front of them on 1 or 2 pages as opposed to the book. The book is amazing. This is going to be the why we're not staying the same. And MSBA wants to see all this data. But for our brainstorming sessions, it's easier to have it on a 1 or 2 page document. And then we start brainstorming next time. Does that make sense? So a few of us will start the ball rolling on what's the data we're bringing to the next session, and then we'll use that next session as a brainstorming session. And in the interim, we'll bounce around the data or the questions about the data and get what everyone's looking for, while simultaneously starting on we'll call it the student data as opposed to the data, right? The student data is why are kids leaving and why are kids coming. So does that sit well with everyone?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, great. Gentlemen, does that make sense to you?
Seems like a good start.
Okay, great. Well, I will turn it back over to Sarah to potentially adjourn the meeting. And
Were we going to talk about future meeting dates?
do we want to talk about future meeting dates, or that was another thing, or do we want to do that via Doodle like we did in the past? I don't know what works for people.
Or just getting a ballpark? Are we looking at monthly meetings?
Yeah.
I was gonna say, the only thing that I would request is, I got a doodle notice a week and a half, 2 weeks before this meeting. Like, if I know once a month we're gonna be having these meetings,
Right.
and it's gonna be somewhere on the 15th
Apologies
every
for
month.
that, then.
No. It's just it's a scheduling thing. As the summer comes up,
Yeah.
with vacations and everything else. Are we talking monthly meetings or bi-monthly at this point?
What do we think?
I leave that to the.
I personally think in the beginning monthly's a.
Yeah.
I think just
probably
because
gonna
of
be
summer
required.
is monthly.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay.
Well, do we want? We can
And if
look
we
at our
say
calendar. If
that
we want to
Monday-
at least book the next one we can start with that if people are on board.
I think if we could find a day of the
A
week,
good day.
you know, and
Yep.
say it's like the second
Tuesday
Monday
of
or-
every month,
yeah.
we'll plan on it. Yep, absolutely. So our next meeting would then be in June. We're coming towards the end of the school year. We're on the 17th.
So this happens to be the third Monday of, right?
Mm-hmm.
3.
Third Monday puts us around the 21st of June, which is right after Father's Day weekend.
Mm-hmm.
How many people travel for that? Say most dads sit home and drink beer, so that
Kids
might
get
be
out of
different.
school that Friday, so
Kids get
it's
out of school the
summer
18th?
vacation, the 21st. Yeah, the 18th is last day.
21st is that.
That's gonna be the start of
Well, what
everyone going on
about the
vacation. Yeah, so does the 14th work better?
So the second.
14th doesn't work for me, but if the majority can, that's.
Or the 16th? If Wednesdays
Does the
work.
7th work
I'm
better
going
for you?
based on my own schedule.
If we pull it to earlier in the month?
I can do the 7th or the.
And are we still looking at the
16%?
5:30 time or
16th was the other.
In the poll, I know 5:30 worked
5:30
the
was
best for
best.
everyone, but if people want to change that, that's fine. Do we want to say the 16th? Were people thinking Wednesday's
Wednesday.
okay, or was Wednesday not good for you, Sarah?
It's just the last week of school, so
Wednesdays
is
are
there
good.
anything? I don't have anything on my calendar.
Oh, there's the 8th grade celebration
On what day?
on Wednesday.
No, that doesn't work.
Is that it? Oh,
It's
is that the
probably
dance?
at night.
Like,
are they
what are they
letting them
doing?
have a dance?
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think that's like an evening.
Well, it usually is.
School day?
It
Yeah, it used to be a dance at night.
It usually
They're probably
was.
not dancing this year, are they?
Maybe they're doing something outside, but it's usually on this property.
It's
so-
marked off as the 8th grade celebration.
And it'll
By
be at this
then,
building.
They'll probably be able to do everything
Yeah,
if the governor keeps
Good. I'm
talking.
glad they have it on the calendar.
Good. And it's here though,
Okay,
so we
what
don't want
about
to
the
do that.
9th?
So,
Ninth?
yeah, so we go to the week earlier, the 7th or the 9th?
9th works for me.
Yep, I can do
Very
it there.
I can do the 9th.
Yeah,
9th?
June 9th works.
Here,
So 5:30.
Sure.
as I sat home looking for the Zoom link earlier.
Sorry. So we'll say June 9th, 5:30 here. And in the interim, we'll get information rolling.
All right.
All right,
All right, I got around.
great.
Do you want a motion
Well,
to
we
Make
adjourn?
a motion to adjourn?
I
almost
entertain.
just adjourned it myself.
So
I just made the motion
I'm
for you.
I made a motion
Second.
to adjourn. Aaron seconds.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely